I'm fully convinced at this point that the two words that live rent-free in Nintendo fanboys' heads are Deck and Steam, not necessarily in that order. So Nintendo of America publishes that the Switch 2 has sold over 3.5 million units worldwide in its first 4 days, and Prosafia Gaming says, so how many Steam Decks were sold in those 4 days? So many people claim to have bought one, and in response to this, D-Shot simply shows a post of Switch Emulation and Super Mario Bros. Wonder up and running on the Steam Deck. Now keep in mind, he wasn't antagonizing the Nintendo audience, nor was he really making a massive point over anything. All he was doing was demonstrating that Switch Emulation is still possible on the Steam Deck. And yet somehow, this harmless tweet of a man getting the most out of hardware that he paid for somehow generated the angriest response from the Nintendo crowd I think I've read all year. So without further ado, let's get into it. Blagoon says, you can emulate Switch games on the Steam Deck. Yeah, after you watch like 50 different tutorials on how to do it and waste 3 days trying to get everything set up, I'll stick with the Switch 2. Okay, so you agree that Switch emulation is possible on the Steam Deck. Like, you agree that it's possible to emulate Nintendo games on this piece of hardware. Yet you are openly advocating for the platform that offers you less Nintendo games, all because something difficult to install, question mark? Like, are you actually serious right now? Kaznius says, why would you downgrade this game to the Steam Deck? The Switch OLED that is a lot cheaper, it's also thinner, making it more portable, and you can remove the Joy-Cons as a bonus. The Switch 2, meanwhile, destroys the Steam Deck in every way. So what's the point in adding this to a bigger, bulkier console? Breaking this down bit by bit, the Switch OLED is inferior to the Steam Deck in literally every way when it comes to running games, as well as the software and hardware itself. So yeah, obviously the Switch OLED is going to be cheaper. It has more expensive games and you have to pay to play your games online, but sure, the opening price, I guess, for the Switch OLED is cheaper than the Steam Deck, I'll give you that, because you're paying for an inferior product. But also, the Switch 2 destroys the Steam Deck in every way? Well, yeah, sure, aside from the game library that the Steam Deck has is way larger than the Switch 2. Games are cheaper on the Steam Deck. You have access to PlayStation and Xbox games, either the same or way greater storage. The Steam Deck has mods and fan games, and also way more Nintendo games than the Switch 2 will ever have. Online gaming is also free on the Steam Deck, but hey, yeah, the Switch 2 is better than the Steam Deck in literally every way, I suppose. Also, reminder number 149 that the Steam Deck is not a console, it is a portable gaming PC. I really don't understand how you fuckers don't know this. It's been 3 years. This comment thread basically sums up Nintendo fanboys' mindset perfectly, where they just for some reason can't see into the future at all. There is no option to play Switch 2 games on the Steam Deck. Yeah, not yet there isn't, but also, even if Switch 2 games don't come to the Steam Deck, they're gonna come to the ROG Ally and the Steam Deck too. Like, you're a fucking idiot if you think that that isn't going to happen. Rainy Days Dream Away says, oh wow, you can emulate a 1.5-year-old 2D side-scroller, now play Cyberpunk without it looking like shit. What's that? A 2025 piece of hardware runs a modern game better than a device that came out in 2022? Damn, you got me there, I guess. Also, I hate to break it to you, but Cyberpunk also runs like shit on the Switch 2. Like, if you think it looks as good as the PC or the Series X or the PS5 version, you're a dumbass. It runs better than the Steam Deck version, I'm not denying that, but then again, we weren't talking about Cyberpunk to begin with. But also, well done for moving the goalpost, because that was quite literally not what the guy was trying to prove. All he was doing was saying that Switch games are indeed possible to play on the Steam Deck. And you look at that and say, yeah, well, this game that's also on the Steam Deck runs better on the Switch too. That's literally not an argument. Truth says, Steam Deck fans are so pathetic that the best thing they can do with it is to play pirated games from last-gen consoles. Steam Deck fans are pathetic because the Steam Deck gives you access to basically any game from any generation, is basically what you're saying right now. But also, this will be the first of many examples of Nintendo fanboys still being dumb enough to not know the difference between piracy and emulation. Friendly reminder that this is what piracy is, and that is what emulation means when referring to computing. If you purchase a legitimate copy of a video game and then you choose to emulate that game on a hardware that it wasn't originally intended for, by definition, you quite literally are not committing piracy. Because you have an authorized copy of someone's work, therefore you are not committing piracy. Are you understanding how this works yet, Nintendo fuckwits? Like, I'm sorry if I'm sounding a little bit hostile here, but you guys have been saying this for so many years, and it is literally not true. Riley Wise says, "You are stupid enough to waste money on that Steam trash, you could just get the Switch." Ah yes, that thing that people get the Switch for, that being the Switch exclusives, you also have access to on the Steam Deck. Therefore, you are stupid for wasting money on the Steam Deck. What's that? Free online gaming, cheaper games, emulation, mod support? Nope, none of that exists. You are a dumbass for buying a Steam Deck over the Nintendo plastic box. If playing Nintendo Switch games on the Steam Deck makes the Steam Deck trash, then surely that also makes the Switch trash by your logic? Bean Bond says, "So how many more did it sell in those 4 days?" Well, at the time of making this video, both OLED versions of the Steam Deck are literally sold out, so yeah, that's an indication that people are certainly buying these products. But also, why the fuck do you care how many copies are being sold? Because copies sold for the umpteenth time do not determine whether a product is good or bad. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet sold as many units as they did purely because it was Pokemon, and for literally no other reason. Like, look me in the eyeballs and unironically tell me that Scarlet and Violet are perfectly good, well-made games. Frozen 2 made $1 billion purely because it was Frozen, but could you tell me a fucking thing about that film? And Spider-Man Far From Home was the first Spider-Man movie to make $1 billion, even though it's objectively one of the worst ones. You literally ignoring everything that the Steam Deck has to offer, and your only argument is, well, actually, the Nintendo plastic box sold better, I'll have you know. Like, that's not an argument, it just makes you look like a corporate shill. Something selling really well doesn't automatically make the hardware itself better, in the same way that something selling not as well doesn't suddenly make the hardware and software take a shit. D-Shot responds, "Gamers who care about games, the capability of emulation is extremely high on Steam Deck and other handheld PCs. The strength of the Switch 2 is certainly solid, but let's face it, it's a closed-off system. Next year, though, Duskblood and Splatoon will be dope as fuck." And in response to him literally praising the Switch 2 whilst acknowledging its faults, he gets a message saying, "You're just broke." It's not enough that D-Shot is praising the Switch 2 whilst also finding areas to improve. It's not enough for you fuckers. He's not sucking Nintendo's meat dry, therefore he's just broke, lol. Generic Psycho says, "Steam Deck users using their Steam Deck to play anything but Steam games. Steam Deck owners not only play games on Steam, but we have access to literally any other video game from older generations, and that is entirely the point. We have access to things that the Switch 2 quite literally does not have access to." But also, why are you using this as a dunk on Steam Deck owners when the Nintendo Switch 2 doesn't have access to Steam games at all, and it's also severely limited to the Nintendo games it has access, and it also has no Xbox or PlayStation exclusives either? Like, the mental gymnastics that you Nintendo guys pull to try demean Steam Deck owners is fucking wild. Corey Cooper responds, "Cool man, you bought a non-Nintendo device to steal Nintendo games. You sure showed them. What a tool." The way I see it, the only tool in this situation is you, because in response to someone emulating games on a Steam Deck, you automatically demean them. I love when fanboys do this. Like, you see someone emulating and he automatically must be stealing. No way he bought a legitimate copy of a game and is playing it on hardware it wasn't intended for. This is the definition of piracy. This is the definition of emulation. You are in the wrong. Fucking educate yourself. Like, a 30-second Google search just disproves this entire narrative that you fuckers won't let go of. It's so weird. Hestia replies, "Steam Deck emulation is the ultimate illusion of control. You're not outsmarting the system, you're just brute forcing it until your fan sounds like a jet engine trying to escape its existential dread." Saying that the Steam Deck is the ultimate illusion of control is kind of weird when you're simping for Nintendo, which is a closed-off platform. Even if it was true that the Steam Deck gave you the illusion of control, you quite literally have fuck all control about the Switch's platform. Because ultimately it's not up to you what games you get to play on the Switch 2, it's entirely up to what Nintendo, the corporate overlords, determine what can and can't be played on the Switch 2. Complaining about the Steam Steam Deck's fans is a valid complaint, especially since, yeah, you're not wrong. When you try play Spider-Man Remastered, for example, yeah, the fucking thing sounds like a Harrier jet taking off. However, if you're playing less demanding games, for example, Wii games or DS games, the fans are fine. Like, they genuinely aren't loud at all. Whether or not the fans will be loud is obviously a case-by-case basis, because people will be playing different games on their Steam Decks. And that's literally what makes the Steam Deck so appealing, is how open of a platform it is. You can play basically any game you like on the Steam Deck, and that's a luxury you don't have access to on the Switch 2, or any video game console for that matter, because they are closed platforms. Magnus says, most people have the decency to not steal. Not everyone has moral standards though. Okay, so prove that he pirated. Prove that he downloaded a ROM off of the internet and didn't pay Nintendo money. Prove that he doesn't own a legitimate copy of Super Mario Bros. Wonder. These are things that a random on the internet quite literally cannot prove, and as a result, it's fucking stupid that you look at emulation and immediately assume it's piracy. Kevin says, Steam Deck bros, Nintendo has no games. Why would I want to play the same Mario game over and over again? Also, Steam Deck bros emulates those same games. This is almost certainly a straw man. Like, what fucker has said that Nintendo has no games? Like, yeah, sure, Nintendo isn't exactly known for pushing the boat out. Like, if they have a winning formula, they're gonna stick with it until its kidneys plop out. I mean, Pokemon is literal proof of this. But also, once again, demean the PC audience. We're able to do something that you quite literally can't do on the Switch 2, therefore we're in the wrong. The Nintendo device has less Nintendo games than the Steam Deck, and rather than calling Nintendo out for that and trying to make positive changes for the Switch 2, you instead demean a platform that has access to features that would make the Switch 2 definitively better if they had these same features. Are you sure about that? Buki says, Steam Deck owners will do anything but play Switch games. So let me get this straight. You see someone playing Switch games on the Steam Deck, and in your mind, that equates to Steam Deck owners not playing Switch games? Like, buddy, just don't. Silver responds, hey, Nintendo America, you might want to check it out. Again, why are you tagging Nintendo? It's the same thing that Nintendo owners did in the last video. Like, genuinely, why do you give a fuck about this? Who benefits from this situation in literally any way ever by you tagging Nintendo? Because the answer is you do not benefit from this, so why do you give a fuck? B responds, without Nintendo games, the Steam Deck would be useless. Yeah, let's ignore the massive Steam Deck library that is bigger than all of the console marketplaces combined. Let's ignore games from other consoles that Steam Deck owners like to emulate, like Xbox and Xbox 360 and Xbox One and PlayStation 1, 2, 3, and 4 games. Yep, let's just ignore all of that. Also, all of these Nintendo games that the Steam Deck has access to and the Switch 2 doesn't have access to, nope, I'm not going to criticize Nintendo for that. I'm just going to take the piss out of the Steam Deck owners for having these games that I don't have access to. I totally aren't a corporate shill. Michael responds, Switch 2 is better than the Steam Deck in every conceivable way. This is just pathetic. We already went over this earlier, but let's speedrun through the reasons why the Steam Deck is still better than the Switch 2. It has a much bigger game library with Steam. Games are cheaper on the Steam Deck and you don't have to pay to play your games online. It has bare minimum the same and in a lot of cases a greater amount of storage. It has access to fan games and mod support. You can emulate literally any Nintendo game on it, which is something you can't do with the Switch 2. And you can also emulate games from Xbox and PlayStation's long lineup of hit games from their history, which is again something that you can't do on the Switch 2. And whilst yeah, Switch 2 emulation might not be possible on the Steam Deck, it's almost certainly going to be possible on the ROG Ally as well as the new generation of Steam Decks, because again, the ROG Ally has better specs than the Switch 2. Like, shut the fuck up and stop shilling for Nintendo. There's pros and cons for both systems, and at the end of the day, the Switch 2 is going to become significantly more outdated when the new Steam Decks arrive. Shatak comments, should point out that the average player does not have the technical knowledge to hack their Steam Deck, a Linux-based platform for emulation, and would rather just buy a Switch 2 and buy games. First of all, you don't have to hack the Steam Deck to emulate games, you fucking idiot. Like, there's literally software built into the Steam Deck when you buy the thing that allows you to emulate. Have you ever heard of Emudeck? But also, Also, let me get this straight. Someone shows that it's possible to emulate Switch games on the Steam Deck, and your response to that is, well, actually, not everyone's smart enough to do that. That's literally a skill issue. The guy shows that it's possible to do so, and there are so many fucking guides online that show that it's possible to do that. Like, that's literally just a skill issue at that point. Emulation nowadays is easier than it's ever been. Apple said, response, Steam Deck owners try not to use emulation to win Switch 2 arguments, impossible. Well, that's funny because I've been doing it throughout this entire video. Emulation is obviously a massive advantage over the Switch 2 that the Steam Deck has, but there's also a lot of other reasons to own one. Ironically enough, the only impossible to win argument at the moment is proving that the Switch 2 has better emulation than the Steam Deck, and at that point, yeah, the Steam Deck is better than the Switch 2 objectively in this regard. Mr. Zoid actually raises a good point. He says, notice how he only shows us the title screen. The game probably doesn't run smoothly. I love EmuDeck, but accept the criticism. Ignoring the fact that this guy is too lazy to literally just YouTube examples of Mario Bros. Wonder running at a good performance on the Steam Deck, I'll show you guys gameplay anyways. Here you can see Super Mario Bros. Wonder running on the Steam Deck at 30 to 60 FPS, which is around the same, if not better, than what the original Switch had to offer. And that took me literally 30 seconds to find on the internet. This comment made me laugh, so in response to Switch emulation, this guy responds with, you're a bum. No one cares about your emulation. You showed how desperate you are for an ounce of attention. And D-Shot responds, you sure cared to go to my profile and look at my tweets to find this days later. What's that? Someone shows off something cool that you can do with the Steam Deck? Well, I sure hope you keep that same energy when people show off cool shit that you can do with Nintendo hardware. Corey Cooper is back and says, I truly don't understand the point of this. Instead of supporting games you obviously want to play, you steal them. Are all Steam Deck owners this dense? This isn't a flex, it's ridiculously ignorant and a bit childish. Breaking this down bit by bit, if you truly don't understand the point of playing Nintendo games on devices other than Nintendo, then you're simply an idiot or a corporate shill, because this objectively is a good thing. More people being able to play more games that are being held hostage on a certain platform. Again, the only dense person here is you, because once again, instead of supporting games you obviously want to play, you just steal them. Emulation is not piracy. Why don't you prove that he stole the game? Why don't you prove that he doesn't own a legitimate copy of Mario Bros. Wonder? Why don't you prove that he didn't redump those files onto his Steam Deck? These are things that you quite literally have no proof of, meaning that it's so stupid that you're throwing these accusations around. Like, can people commit piracy when using emulators? Yeah, of course they can, but that is not the fault of the emulator itself, nor is it the fault of the good-hearted people that just want to emulate games legally. This is so fucking frustrating. Like, this is the easiest argument to understand ever, and yet Nintendo dudes just simply refuse to accept reality. But then again, I guess that's why you clicked on this video, right? Also, just giving a quick shout out to these three guys here. Whilst I definitely don't condone calling people regards on the internet, it is nice to see that these guys were actually relatively based in this situation. But anyways, guys, that's all the Nintendo salt I have for you today. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like it, drop it a comment, and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all in the next one. Take care.